Finance Subcommittee hearing, energy policy analysts voiced support for new tax incentives to promote energy efficiency. The committee looked at ways to make current incentives more effective in a reformed tax code. This is an hour 20 minutes.
Why don't we go ahead and get started, if everybody can find a chair. Good morning. Today's hearing examines tax reform and federal energy policy and considers some proposals to promote efficient use of energy resources. Tax code has long served as a way to promote energy policy goals. For most of this time, the code only offered incentives for the production of energy, first from mineral resources and then from oil and gas. Recent years have brought important incentives for renewable energy resources, though unfortunately many of those still remain temporary and uncertain. Even more recently, Congress has decided to reintroduce certain tax incentives that promote the efficient use of energy, recognizing the value in preserving our domestic resources by developing technologies that use less energy to accomplish the same task. However, with the possibility of comprehensive tax reform in the next Congress and within the context of a contentious debate on how to close the federal deficit, we need to assess the existing policies to determine if their goals are worth the cost to the taxpayer, and if they are, and I believe that energy efficiency is a worthy policy goal, then we need to examine the best and least cost ways of achieving that goal. At today's hearing, we have a panel of expert witnesses who will help us consider these three issues. First, to understand the opportunities that are presented to our economy and our energy infrastructure and to the environment that can result from the more efficient use of our resources. Second, to consider if creating incentives through the tax code is a sensible and efficient way of promoting energy efficiency investments. And if so, then the third question is to examine how we can improve our existing incentives and make them more effective, easier to use, and less expensive to the federal government. Over the past two Congresses, Senator Snowe and I, along with Senator Feinstein and others, Senator Cardin has been very involved, have worked to develop reforms to our existing efficiency incentives. Whenever possible, we've adhered to general principles that we believe to be consistent with the goals of tax reform. We've striven to provide technology-neutral structures that offer incentives based on performance and not just the cost of putting in the particular energy-saving technology. We've worked to ensure that the efficiency savings are able to be measured and verified, and that fraud is minimized to the greatest extent possible. Finally, we've sought to ensure that innovative new efficiency technologies can utilize existing policies. The result of this work is three bills that have been introduced in this Congress, one focusing on the commercial buildings deduction, one focusing on tax credits for homeowners, and one that promotes efficiency in the industrial sector. I hope we can examine how these bills fit into the discussion that I've outlined above. I welcome an honest assessment of the bills and encourage any thoughts on how they can be improved. This morning's hearing will consist of one panel of very distinguished witnesses. Let me just introduce them briefly. Mr. Dan Arvisu is Director of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, of course, in Golden, Colorado, and we claim him in New Mexico since he used to be at Sandia. Next is Steve Nadell, who is the Executive Director of the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. Then we have Mark Wagner, who is the Vice President for Government Relations with Johnson Controls. And finally, we welcome Mr. Matt Golden, who is a principal at efficiency.org and the policy chair at Efficiency First. Before I call on our witnesses, my colleague Ron Wyden, who's soon to be the chair of the Energy Committee, as well as a distinguished member of this Finance Committee and who's been very interested in these issues, let me defer to him. Thank him for being here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, as you know, there's not a whole lot certain about what goes on here in the United States Senate, including when, in fact, the Senate session may wrap up for this year. But I just want to note that there is one certainty for everybody who works in the energy field, and that is these debates are going to be less thoughtful and they're going to be less informed because you won't be part of those debates. And I think people are going to understand that when voices get raised and the debate gets shrill, just how valuable those particular attributes, the fact that you always brought us back to policy and sort of planet reality when the debates seem to move in a different direction. And I just want to note that while this may be the last energy hearing for the year, and maybe that remains to be seen as well, given the schedule, there are a lot of us who are going to make sure that the cell phone connections between Washington, D.C. and New Mexico are operating so that we can continue to have your wise counsel and your thoughtful approach on these issues. And thank you for giving me a chance to say that. And if the crowd wants to break into a big round of applause, I won't have any particular problem with that.
Well, thank you. Well, thanks for your very kind words, and I'm sure as soon as I get out of town, you can solve all these problems. So I'm trying to hasten that day. But thank you very much for your kind comments. Why don't we start and just go across the table and have everybody take 5 or 6 minutes or however long you think is necessary to make the comments you think we ought to be aware of on these subjects, and we'll try to shed some light on the issue of using the tax code to achieve some of these objectives. Dr. Arvisu, go right ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Bingaman and Senator Wyden and other members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss how energy efficiency concepts and technologies can strengthen our energy security, our environment, and our economic growth. And I'll submit, with your approval, my written testimony for the.
Yeah, we'll include everyone's written testimony as if it were read.
So I'm Dan Arvisu, the director at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, the Department of Energy's primary laboratory for research and development of energy efficiency and other clean energy technologies, and research into new, more efficient ways to construct, modernize, operate our homes and our commercial buildings and businesses is an important part of our mission. While we don't take positions on legislation and policy, I will speak this morning about the advancements that have been achieved from federal investments in energy efficiency and the proven benefits that these bring to our nation. I also serve on the Alliance to Save Energy's Commission on National Energy Efficiency Policy, and when released next year, the Commission's recommendations will be comprehensive and a roadmap to meet our nation's energy futures. At NREL, we've learned that energy efficiency is fundamental, and it's fundamental to transforming our energy systems. The negawatts that aren't used are just as important as the megawatts that are. That realization has been confirmed repeatedly on the national scale. 3 years ago, McKinsey produced a landmark analysis that showed that by 2020, the U.S. could reduce non-transport energy consumption by a quarter. That would cost $520 billion, but would pay back $1.2 trillion in energy cost savings. In 2010, the National Academy of Engineering and Sciences report also found that the nation could save money by cutting energy consumption by 30% and produce the same amount of goods and services. And at our institution at NREL, We've calculated that hundreds of peer-reviewed energy-saving measures that are currently available could reduce energy consumption by a half by 2030, and the cost savings would be twice the dollar amount invested. And these reports all imply and suggest that to realize this potential, public policy is still necessary. A leading example of the R&D successes achieved in recent years is the Commercial Building Partnership sponsored by the Department of Energy. It partners with building owners and operators on a number of new buildings and also retrofits, resulting in compelling results. One project, what we participated with Target in Colorado, cut energy consumption by 35% at their store, and they're now busy replicating that enterprise-wide. At the Research Support Facility at NREL, this is where I currently have my office, is another example of how much can be accomplished when energy efficiency is a fundamental attribute in the building design. At the RSF, which is the world's largest net zero energy office building, energy consumption is 1/2 of the energy of a building built to code in our region, and it's cost competitive, including the solar panels on the roof with conventional buildings. And I invite you to come out and take a look for yourself. Private residences, which comprise a little more than half of the energy used by buildings in the U.S., provide equally large opportunities for savings. The DOE's Building America program has demonstrated homes can have 40% energy reduction at no additional cost in almost every U.S. climate zone. The Habitat for Humanity homes built under this program likewise prove that ambitious energy efficiency targets and goals can be accomplished with very tight cost constraints. Widely used simulation tools like DOE's Energy Plus package and the Building Optimization Program are continually being refined so that businesses, consumers, utilities, government agencies, and policymakers have the most accurate energy insights and can make the best efficiency decisions possible. Industrial energy efficiency is an area where our new technology can dramatically improve performance. One example is the fast-growing data center industry. Set to open next year, NREL's new petascale high-performance computing system is a leading edge both in computing and also in energy efficiency. And a comparable existing standard data center today would be 13 times more energy consuming than the NREL system. So recently I've been reminded just how susceptible our buildings and energy systems are to natural disasters. And as a member of New York Governor Cuomo's 2100 Infrastructure Commission, we will consider the related advantages in energy initiatives and how these can strengthen residential, commercial building resiliency against all types of peril. In conclusion, I commend the committee for considering initiatives for improving energy productivity in our nation. My many years in energy research convinced me that few solutions could be as fruitful, and putting these great strides that we've made in energy efficiency to produce the use on a national scale, I think, is admirable. So thank you very much for this opportunity to share our insights, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Nadel, go right ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, other members of the committee. First, I wanted to second Senator Wyden's comments, and thank you very much, Senator Bingaman, for your many years of service in the Senate. You've really been a real leader for the Energy and Finance Committees, and we very much appreciate all that you've done for energy efficiency over your many years here. I also wanted to briefly acknowledge Senator Snowe, who is also retiring. I see her aide here. She wasn't able to make it. She has also worked tirelessly, often with you, Senator Bingaman, in introducing energy efficiency legislation. We appreciate both of your efforts. Now, in your opening remarks, Senator, you talked about 3 questions. Dr. Arvizu basically addressed your first question, and I wanted to concentrate on the next 2. You asked if the tax code is an appropriate vehicle for promoting energy efficiency investments. You also asked us to discuss the best structures for tax incentives that could generate the greatest efficiency gains. Regarding the first question, based on our research and analysis, we conclude that the tax code can be an appropriate vehicle for promoting energy efficiency investments. I say can because it depends on how the tax incentives are structured. In our research, we have found that the tax incentives that were enacted in the 1980s were not very effective in spurring substantial energy savings, as these credits promoted tried and true energy efficiency measures that many consumers and businesses were installing on their own. Most of the participants were what we call free riders. They took the money, but would have taken the same actions even without the incentives. Furthermore, the amount of the tax credit in the 1980s was too small to spur many additional investments. On the other hand, tax incentives enacted in 2005 were more targeted. They emphasized advanced technologies and paying higher incentives. Our review of the experience with these has found that the tax incentives for new homes and appliances in particular were very effective in growing the market for qualifying homes and appliances, and that the incentives for residential heating and cooling equipment and also hybrid heavy-duty vehicles were also very successful in encouraging development of new products and purchases of the most efficient products. Based on these experiences, and turning now to your second question, we concluded that the most useful tax incentives target long-term structural changes in the market, using temporary federal assistance to build the market for energy-efficient products so the tax incentives can be phased out. At this point, the market can continue to grow, supported by other energy efficiency programs and policies, such as Energy Star, utility energy efficiency programs, building codes, and equipment efficiency standards. We have labeled this process the market transformation approach. We use tax incentives to help establish a sustained long-term market. Using such an approach, we should target advanced technologies and practices that currently have a low market share, but with federal support over a defined period of time, maybe 5 years or so, their market share can grow and they can better prosper on their own after the tax incentives end. Advanced products and services should be specified in terms of performance, leaving it to manufacturers and service providers to decide which technologies to use to reach the specified performance levels. By focusing on products with efficiency levels that currently have a very small market share, we can keep costs down and minimize the number of free riders. A federal role is particularly useful in the early stages of market development because the federal government can provide a national market with uniform qualifying criteria and incentives, making it more likely that manufacturers and contractors will make the investments to develop market qualifying energy-saving technologies and services. It will be much harder to transform markets without federal involvement. I would note that the same market transformation approach can be used for other advanced energy technologies, not just energy efficiency. Could do market transformation for modular nuclear power plants, advanced renewable energy sources, and new oil and gas drilling and exploration techniques. But once these technologies become established in the market, federal incentives can be phased out. Returning to energy efficiency, our organization has analyzed the cost and savings of 5-year federal tax incentives for several high-efficiency products and services. We found that all of the products that we analyzed were highly cost-effective. Our analysis is summarized in my written testimony. The average cost to the Treasury for all of these credits was only 28 cents per million BTU saved. This is less than a factor of 10 of what the average energy cost is, making them highly cost-effective. We found that the most cost-effective options include tax incentives for commercial buildings, energy-efficient new homes, heating and cooling equipment and appliances, and combined heat and power systems. We also found that whole house energy-saving retrofits and replacing old chillers were also very cost-effective. Now, the next two witnesses will be talking about commercial buildings and residential buildings. I won't talk further about those. I will therefore concentrate on some of the other provisions. First, incentives for energy-efficient new homes, heating and cooling equipment and appliances were also among the most cost-effective in our analysis. These products are the subject to recently expired federal tax incentives. We recommend that the energy efficiency requirements in these provisions be updated. The market has moved, the levels need to be strengthened, but with that strengthening, we believe it is appropriate to reinstate these provisions and continue them for the next 5 years or so, based on these updated qualification levels. I'd also note that combined heat and power systems are poised to make substantial strides as utilities and their customers look to replace old, dirty power plants that are now being retired. A tax incentive will spur more combined heat and power systems during this critical period. The provision in the bill that you have introduced, Senator, with others, modestly expands an existing CHP incentive now on the books to address some issues with the previous incentive. It will help make it more workable. We did find this to be one of the most cost-effective provisions we examined. I also wanted to briefly note the chiller provision, also in S3352, is very timely. We provide a credit to encourage replacement of old, inefficient chillers that contain CFC refrigerants. CFCs, as you probably all know, harm the ozone layer and have not been permitted in new chillers for many years. However, some of the old chillers remain, leaking CFCs and using excessive amounts of energy. Building owners are reluctant to replace these chillers due to the upfront costs. The proposed incentive would cover part of these costs, but would be available for only 3 years. Therefore, building owners would have a limited window to take advantage of the incentive. That provision also contains some innovative provisions to reduce chiller loads, encourage smaller chillers, saving more amounts of energy, and those chiller downsizing techniques would be very useful from a market transformation perspective. Finally, I wanted to note that in my written testimony, I won't go into it here, we discussed some problems with depreciation periods, particularly for commercial and CHP systems. And we recommend that as part of tax reform that Congress revise these depreciation periods so that they are based on the average service life of this equipment as opposed to this current more political hodgepodge, if you will. So in conclusion, we recognize that with tax reform, the number of incentives and their costs need to be substantially reduced. Based on our analysis as part of any tax reform legislation, we recommend that limited funding be set aside provisions with the largest energy savings per federal dollar invested. These are provisions that have a large multiplier effect and where incentives can be ended or revised after about 5 years. And we'd be happy to work with you and the committee going forward to help design incentives with the most bang per buck. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wagner, go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Mark Wagner from Johnson Controls. We're an energy services company. And for years, companies like ours have been in the business of saving energy for our customers by renovating and upgrading their buildings with energy-efficient equipment. This includes public sector buildings for the federal, state, and local government, as well as private sector commercial buildings. The 179D federal tax deduction for commercial buildings has been a valuable tool to help finance these type of energy efficiency upgrades, particularly in the public sector where we've done a large number of projects. Let me give you 2 examples where projects have been certified for the tax deduction. In Maryland, 7 Caroline County public schools and the Kent County Courthouse and Government Center are more efficient with the help of this tax credit. In San Antonio, Texas, we made energy efficiency upgrades at the Convention Center, Airport, and the Alamo Dome. But the use of 179D for private sector buildings lags behind. Despite the large potential market opportunity for commercial buildings, shopping malls, and multifamily housing, the tax deduction is significantly underutilized. There's a number of basic reasons why. Let me touch upon a couple. First, many private sector buildings change ownerships frequently, unlike public sector buildings, which limits the time in which an energy efficiency investment can pay back. Second, many private buildings have debt or are individually incorporated and have no credit rating, making it more difficult to finance projects. And thirdly, there's often misalignment between owner and tenant in commercial buildings, between who has to make the investment and who gets the benefit. Let me mention that every year, Johnson Controls conducts a survey of executive decision makers who are responsible for making investments in energy efficiency. In our 2012 survey of over 1,100 U.S. executives, we've had 3 findings that are significant to our discussion today. First, we found a 20% increase from the year before from those executives who saw energy management as a significant or very significant to their operations. Second, they listed access to capital as the largest barrier to financing energy efficiency projects. And third, tax incentives were deemed by far the most important tool. 42% of the executives found it to be the highest priority for public policy action. S3591, which you've sponsored, the Commercial Building Modernization Act, addresses many of the unique challenges faced in financing energy-efficient projects for the commercial building sector. First, it's technology neutral. It gives building owners and contractors the flexibility and freedom to install traditional as well as state-of-the-art technologies to meet a variety of operational and tenant needs. Second, it's performance-based and rewards the building owner. The deeper the retrofit, the larger the deduction per square foot. Third, it provides verification of energy savings by giving 60% of the deduction for the design and 40% after calculation of actual savings. Fourth, it changes and improves the measuring stick. Current law requires a retrofit of 50% savings against ASHRAE code. This would be changed to a sliding scale of options for energy savings benchmarked against the building's actual energy consumption for the previous years. Now, let me explain why this one's important. Mr. Chairman, you're very familiar with the energy efficiency upgrade Johnson Controls recently completed at the Empire State Building. Well, under current law, that project does not qualify for 179D tax deduction, even though we are projecting a 38% energy savings as compared to the building's previous performance. But under 3591, the Empire State Building project would qualify because savings are compared to the building's own energy consumption. Finally, the legislation provides a better incentive for real estate investment trusts and certain limited liability partnerships to participate. In conclusion, 179D will expire at the end of 2013. We've joined with 47 other organizations from the real estate, construction, lending, manufacturing, supply, and efficiency communities in support of the extension of 179D and the modifications that you've proposed in S. 3591. As we look to the new Congress, we hope the Senate considers a combination of policies and programs that create market demand and provide commercial building owners with enhanced incentives, standardized processes, and financial models that attract private sector funding. We can make a large impact with only a modest investment. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to testify, and more importantly, thank you for your years of leadership in the Senate, particularly with respect to energy efficiency.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Golden, go right ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Bingaman, and the distinguished members of the subcommittee for this opportunity to offer my perspective on the role of tax incentives to promote energy efficiency. I come to this committee as both an advocate working to bring investors and the capital to the energy efficiency market, and as a licensed contractor and board member of Efficiency First, a trade association that represents over 1,000 small businesses in all 50 states. Efficiency First is a strong supporter of Senate Bill 1914, the Cut Energy Bills at Home Act, also known as 25E, which puts in place the first performance-based tax incentives for existing homes. We thank Senator Bingaman, Snowe, Feinstein, and for their leadership on this issue. Energy efficiency incentives remain smart tax policy that will stimulate private investment and job creation while driving savings directly to American homeowners. The average American family spends over $1,800 per year on energy for their homes, which equates to $200 billion drain on household budgets every single year. This represents 22% of all U.S. energy consumption, which is a third more energy than used in passenger trucks and cars combined. Retrofitting these inefficient homes will create thousands of U.S. jobs in some of the hardest hit industries, including construction and manufacturing. These are jobs on Main Street and small businesses that cannot be outsourced, using materials that are 90% made in the USA. We are putting energy savings back into the wallets of American families and into our communities. Energy efficiency is unique in that it creates its own cash flow. Simply put, it pays for itself. However, there are significant market barriers that prevent this vital resource from being harvested more effectively. One of the key steps towards a solution is to begin to account for energy savings as a resource. Reducing demand on the grid through energy efficiency is akin to building power plants, only cheaper, 100% domestic, and completely clean. We know how to finance power plants. Power plants supply predictable amounts of energy into established markets, and utilities can easily raise capital to make these investments in energy supply. However, we lack the same capital sources and markets for energy efficiency, even though it's widely understood to be the most cost-effective resource for meeting our energy needs. In fact, the energy we have saved through energy efficiency efforts of the last 40 years equates to a resource that is greater than any other single energy source in the country, greater than nuclear, natural gas, or coal. S. 1914 is a great example of tax policy that can help move the market towards valuing energy savings as a resource. This legislation provides a financial incentive to homeowners to increase the energy performance of their homes. The greater the savings, the higher the incentive. Transitioning to a performance-based incentive allows for technology and business model neutrality and creates a system that is flexible and rewards innovation. The good news is that the market and systems we need to make this industry economically sustainable over the long haul are already here, just not yet to scale. The contracting industry is actively moving towards performance-based models, with dedicated home performance companies growing in markets across the country, and leading HVAC contractors, national manufacturers, and trade associations beginning to invest heavily in training and resources to move from single measures to whole-house solutions. In addition, investments in energy efficiency have dramatically increased at a state level. This includes Recovery Act investments in workforce training, quality assurance, and program infrastructure that has resulted in home performance projects increasing by 300% over the last 3 years. Utility investments have also increased dramatically, averaging nearly a 20% year-over-year growth since 2005, substantially faster than the economy at large. We are also seeing private investment beginning to ramp up. Private capital markets are on the verge of the first-ever securitization for residential energy efficiency lending. This step forward promises access to senior capital markets and eventually much lower cost of capital. Homeowners will soon be able to access loans designed specifically for residential energy efficiency at lower rates and better terms. Simply put, we now know that energy efficiency loans are more likely to get paid off. We believe that tax incentives play a critical role in helping scale this early-stage market. Tax credits directly benefit homeowners without adding layers of bureaucracy and will create consistent national markets that will make getting to scale vastly easier for all involved. We believe that with a combination of smart national tax policy and local infrastructure, we can enable a transformation in residential energy efficiency that will engage markets and drive private capital. Senate Bill 1914, combined with an improved 25C, is a first critical step in this direction. Creating markets is important, but let's all remember the small businesses, construction workers, and homeowners that will be helping through these incentives. The energy efficiency industry puts people to work in ways that are both positive for their communities and the environment, and perhaps most importantly, helps American homeowners make ends meet in homes that are more comfortable, healthier, and longer lasting. This is truly a unique opportunity to support small businesses in America and homeowners, all while helping the country meet its climate and energy goals. We appreciate the ongoing efforts of this subcommittee and look forward to continuing to support your important work advancing energy efficiency through smart tax credits. Thank you for this opportunity to share our views, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for your statements. Let me start with a few questions and then defer to Senator Wyden and Senator Cardin. One obvious issue, Mr. Nadel, let me ask you about this market transformation approach. You're talking about a 5-year kind of a putting in place incentives that phase out at the end of 5 years. If in fact we have all of these benefits to be realized in the area of residential and commercial buildings, why doesn't it make sense to look at longer term incentives in the tax code for construction and retrofit of commercial and residential buildings in an efficient, energy efficiency way?
Okay, thank you. Yes, we advocate initial incentives for 5 years, but then taking stock of the market and how it's doing. And has the market sufficiently transformed? Does the program need to be tuned or modified? You know, it's working well in certain areas, not working well in other areas, as opposed to just something blanket. We think too many of the tax incentives have been on the books and have never been really reviewed. But some of the incentives we think should continue afterwards, but you should make that judgment call afterwards. Just like some of the existing, the appliance credit, we've revised the qualification levels twice as we've extended it. You know, so there probably would be some refinements that would be needed. In my written testimony, I also suggest the option of repayable tax incentives if, in order to support certain retrofits, for example, if the cost starts getting too high, but ways to continue to support the market even without as much cost to the federal government. So it's not saying end it absolutely, but let's look carefully at it after 5 years.
Let me ask Mr. Wagner and any of the rest of you that want to comment about, you know, we've had in the last several years, we've talked seriously about trying to adopt something like the Homestar proposal around here as another way to get more investment in energy efficiency. That's a different avenue, but how does it compare with the kinds of tax incentives that we're talking about here? Would it make more sense to be trying to do this through that kind of a program, through Homestar, or should we do both, or should we do neither?
Well, I think you've got a couple different approaches. One is certainly a Home Star and the Building Star approach, where that was more a rebate on specific type of equipment out there. And a lot of that was being talked about to try to stimulate that type of approach. I think the benefit of the tax incentive is one in which it really helps, because of the level you have to reach in terms of the efficiency. It helps really drive some larger projects that reach a deeper energy efficiency goal, and that's the beauty of the tax incentive. I think you're looking at that yardstick and saying, can I meet this goal in this project? And so you're striving to make more efficient projects, if you will, that drive more energy savings. So that's I think, the true benefit of doing it from the tax side.
Just ask about, I think what I understood you to say, Mr. Wagner, in your testimony, that property owned by real estate investment trusts, which is a lot of property, obviously, a lot of the commercial property in the country, those properties are not eligible to qualify for the existing commercial building incentive. Could you elaborate on that, if I'm understanding that correctly, and why that is the case? Obviously, that's a major problem in the current law, if that's...
Yes, and it's one that's certainly addressed by the proposed legislation. Currently, many of these commercial buildings belong to the large real estate owners with legal ownership structured as an LLC, as you pointed out. And many of them are non-credited rated, meaning there's no credit history that they've got and no assets which can be held against as security against the mortgage. So this fact kind of makes banks wary of making energy efficiency loans in this area. So that's why I think it's important in the provision that's in the proposed legislation to address this.
My time's up. Senator Wyden.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This has been an excellent panel, and let me get your sense with respect to where I think we are at this point in the debate. We're, of course, debating the intersection between energy policy and tax policy. And the Senate Finance Committee earlier this year, I think, made the correct call in terms of trying to start this debate. What we recognized is that you ought to extend the current tax provisions, at least for a relatively short period of time, a year or thereabouts, and that was what was done with respect to the production tax credit for renewable energy and for the 25C residential energy efficiency credits, so that we wouldn't be pulling the rug out from under these important programs, and you all have touched on that. The question is then, what happens from this point on? And there are a number of us who sit on both this committee and the Energy Committee, and I think it's going to be important to try to lay out some principles early on with respect to what we ought to be working for. And I want to ask your reaction specifically to making a bedrock principle of fundamental tax reform a more level playing field between the various energy sources. Because what we have seen over the years, and I've sat next to Senator Bingaman for more than a decade on both of these committees, is a lot of the programs that you all correctly identify as so important, the renewable programs, the energy efficiency programs, they're essentially on a temporary status. And a lot of the other programs, the more traditional programs, have been embedded in the tax code for years, in effect have acquired a more permanent kind of status. I don't see how we improve, number one, the investment climate for the kinds of important programs you're talking about if we don't have a more permanent and level kind of playing field, nor do I think you really get out the all of the above kind of approach that every senator says they're for. I often kid and say it's not an energy speech unless you say you're for all of the above 3 or 4 times. And I don't see how you really can be for that without a more level playing field. So I'd just be interested in your reaction to that being a bedrock principle of tax reform as we start these more extensive discussions next year, and we just go down the road.
Senator Wyden, that's a great question, and one I think that deserves a considerable amount of attention. This is a complex area, clearly. The one thing I would say is that we should be making decisions based on the best information and the best analytics that are available, and some of those are woefully inadequate. And so I would say that there's a lot of opportunity to do some analysis that allows there to be more thoughtful a policy built on very quantifiable trends that we see in the marketplace. It's difficult to know what's going to happen 5 years from now. It's difficult to know, even more so, what's going to happen 10 years from now. And we will miss some important market dynamics if we don't have good analytics. So the first thing I would offer is that the tools and the simulation and modeling type of programs are getting more sophisticated. They're not the end all. They depend on the assumptions that you make in order to understand what the outcomes are. But those tools should be transparent. And one of the things that we should focus on is the true cost of energy and the true cost of all of the things that relate to the societal benefits that we expect out of our energy system. And we're expecting a transformation to occur, and we're expecting it to occur over some period of time. And as we make incremental improvements toward that endpoint, we need to measure how well are we doing. And one of the things that I would offer is that the portfolio will shift in terms of mix. And so, as a practical matter, I think it's great that we have natural gas and an expectation that the costs will be low for some period of time. But it is part of a portfolio. It is part of a portfolio that in the future will have a very different profile than the one we have today. And we need to be deliberate about what that endpoint needs to look like and move toward that endpoint again with strong understanding of what our policies are yielding in terms of change in that portfolio and at what pace.
Level playing field. I think I have time for one more, and maybe I'll ask you to do it in writing. Go ahead, Mr. Mendoza.
Okay, yes, I agree that we do need a level playing field as a bedrock principle. I agree with you that it's a problem that efficiency, renewable energy have temporary breaks, some other sources have permanent ones. I would advocate that everybody should be put on this 5-year schedule, sort of like the Farm Bill. It's not saying get rid of it, but every 5 years we look at it and say, what makes the most sense going forward? But as you have long-term permanent things, I think we get a lot more waste where money is being spent in things where it maybe isn't needed.
Let's do this. My time is up. Mr. Wagner, if you and Mr. Golden would furnish your answer in writing on this point with respect to the level playing field, and I would also ask, just if you would, Mr. Golden, in writing, also give us your views with respect to how the whole home credit being combined with the 25C proposal could advance this idea of the more level playing field. And,
Absolutely, thank you.
My colleagues are all waiting to ask questions, so if we could have those comments. I want you to know I'm going to read them personally.
Great. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. The order here, based on arrival, would be Senator Cardin, and then Senator Thune, and then Senator Carper. So go right ahead. Senator Cardin has been a co-sponsor of this legislation that Senator Snowe and I have developed, and we appreciate his strong support.
Well, Senator Bigman, first of all, thank you for your leadership, not just on this committee, but on the Energy Committee. You have really, I think, provided the direction for our country that a sound energy policy is critically important for our national security. It's important for our environment, and done right will create more jobs in our community. So I thank you for your leadership. You're going to be sorely missed, not just on this committee, but in the United States Senate. And we're going to try to follow in your footsteps, but it's going to be difficult. So thank you very much for everything that you have done. The reforms and extension on Section 179D is very important. I particularly note the two provisions that would measure the performance based upon the building existing building baseline. The example given by Mr. Wagner on the Empire State Building, I think, is well taken, and then the allocation to the tax-exempt entities to allow allocations to the designers of the building. I think all of that makes sense so that it becomes effectively used. I might point out there are other bills that are pending in this committee. I'm working with Senator Crapo on the Cool Roofs bill that gives us a more realistic depreciation schedule for industry buildings, developers who use cool roofs, and then the historic tax credit with Senator Snowe that gives a reward for using historic retrofits for energy efficiencies. I think all of those are performance-based type of ways that we can improve our respect for energy consumption in our environment and our economy. I just want to follow up quickly on the chairman's point about the 5 years or longer, et cetera. I fully appreciate the need to evaluate programs. And there's no question that as we've done that, we've been able to find ways to fine-tune or to reform or to eliminate those provisions that don't work, and we should always preserve that opportunity to do it. I am concerned, though, that we have gotten into a habit here on extenders that have very little to do with evaluating programs and have a lot to do with the uncertainty in the market on the use of these available tools, which we pay a price for that. So I want to get the time limit right here, but I also want to understand the impact of congressional short-term extensions of credits as to what impact that has on the usefulness of these tax provisions. We get criticized they don't do very much, but if they're so short-term, we understand why they may not be. Anyone wish to comment on that? The short-term dangers here?
I'll take a shot. I think it's critical because in our business, if you do a project in a commercial building, it may take quite some time to do. It may take a year or more to just design the effort and then into construction period. And if you're trying to, if you see the end of the tax period where it may have to be in place and working at that point, if you're not sure you can get there, there's that uncertainty to say, we don't know if we can factor this into the economics of the project because we don't know if we can get there before this tax incentive, whichever it might be, expires out there. And then we're not sure whether it'll be reinstated or not. So I think that uncertainty for the business community as well as the design and the construction of these long-term projects really it puts a kind of chilling effect on it if you're not kind of at the beginning of the program, if you're towards.
Well, that's certainly true on production tax credits, and we see that now on solar. Even though the expiration date is several years out, it's already affecting decisions being made. So, Mr. Chairman, I just point out if we were to extend the program for 5 years, everybody thinks you're safe for 5 years. You're not. You might be safe for a few years, but then the uncertainty creeps in, and the planning process and all the hurdles you have to do in order to get the project completed to meet the standards required by the code may have a pretty chilling effect or a cost effect on proceeding. Could we just talk 1 minute about the job implication here? We all know we have high unemployment in the construction industry. Does anyone here have some help for us as to what impact this could have on our economy and getting people back to work?
I can comment briefly on it without getting into the exact analysis of these particular bills, but in general, energy efficiency is very labor-intensive and tends to create a lot more jobs than, say, investments in mining, drilling, new power plants, et cetera. So we've always found that for each $1 million you invest in energy efficiency, you typically create about, I think it's about 7 net jobs, meaning 7 more jobs than if you invested it in other energy resources. So these bills will be, I think, powerful job creators.
Mr. Golden, very quickly.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that we also find that this goes through the whole supply chain. So there's been a study that the Home Performance Resource Center conducted in the last couple of years that showed that over 90% of the materials used in the residential sector are domestically produced. These are big materials, and so it's not just construction jobs. We're also seeing that reflected in the manufacturing community.
I think that's very important.
If I can add, Senator, the Political Economy Research Institute, along with the Green Building Council and Real Estate Roundtable and NRDC, did a report last year in June, and the proposed revision just for 179D would create over 77,000 new jobs, according to their report.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Thune.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to congratulate you on your distinguished service in the United States Senate and also for your great work over the years on energy issues. Your leadership is going to be going to be missed around here. And I'm pleased that we have the opportunity to do one last energy-related hearing before you leave. I agree with the assumption that's been made that comprehensive tax reform is going to be the opportunity to seriously examine how the federal government conducts energy policy through the tax code, and I'm hopeful that any deal to address the fiscal cliff will at least include a pathway for us to get to comprehensive tax reform sometime next year. And you've all, I think, commented already on, to some degree, on whether or not that's the way in which we ought to be doing this through the tax code, having the IRS administer these policies as opposed to having them done through other agencies that would be more appropriate, more fitting. But I also want to drill down a little bit on this, the question of the temporary nature of many of the tax incentives that we have and many of the energy tax incentives that we have in the code today. A lot of these things get underutilized, has already been noted, by the sector that they're supposed to benefit simply because they have this on-again, off-again nature. And I'm wondering if what your thoughts are with regard to whether we would be better off, instead of having numerous targeted incentives that expire periodically, moving toward instead a limited number of longer-term technology-neutral incentives. And I know, Mr. Wagner, you mentioned in your testimony the 179D tax deduction and how that falls into this category of being underutilized because of this temporary nature. But anyway, your thoughts about technology-neutral incentives applied over a longer period of time so you address the economic certainty issue that's been raised, gets raised so many times over and over again, as opposed to these little niche, boutique-type approaches that we have in terms of policy today.
So I thank you for that question, and I think that that the duration and creating certainty for small businesses and projects is really a critical aspect of the effectiveness of any tax policy. In an industry like the home performance industry, where companies are also making investments and ramping up their own businesses, these are longer payback periods, and so uncertainty really plays into a role as the business community is evaluating making these investments to actually transition their businesses. We also strongly support performance-based incentives as technology and business model neutral, so that we don't have to continually be revisiting tax code and making adjustments to individual technologies. And quite frankly, none of us can really predict what technologies are going to emerge or what makes the most sense for any individual building. So it becomes the great equalizer. And fundamentally, whether it's residential, commercial, or renewables for that matter, we're talking about valuing either the production or the savings as a resource, and fundamentally that's about what emerges at the meter, not the individual technologies that get us there.
I would add that we need to be very careful. If we make it too broad, it basically just tends to encourage free riders, people who are already going to do things anyway, and if they qualify. If you were to try to make it very broad, you have to be very careful that you really are promoting the advanced technologies and not business as usual, and that can get very challenging. It's probably a little easier in the residential commercial sectors. We have two bills here that are performance-based, based on the baseline for the current home. But for places like industry, for places like equipment, heating, cooling equipment, those baselines always change, and you need to allow for that, or else you're just going to get high costs, high free riders without a lot of impact.
Anybody else?
I think you hit on the keys are technology neutral, performance-based, and then having, particularly for commercial buildings, having a process where you verify the savings, I think, are really key to show that the savings are real.
And I agree with my colleagues. And the only thing I would add is I think I think there's some merit in this discussion, and I would very much encourage that we fully understand what objectives we're trying to accomplish. And more importantly, I think there's an opportunity to aggregate lots of what I would call distributed and smaller type of improvements, but when aggregated and allows the private sector to make investments that they can ensure some reasonable returns on investment, that would be then the ingredients for success. So it really is about unleashing the market capital in a way that can move that marketplace.
One more question, Mr. Chairman. Is that
right ahead?
If I could just sort of a follow-up to that, ask if you have any ideas about how Congress could better design incentives that could be phased out once they've helped to create a market. You know, because what we do right now is we'll do an extension for a 2-year, or 3-year, or maybe even a 5-year. And although the analogy to writing a farm bill might make some sense, as somebody who serves on the Ag Committee and has to write a farm bill every 5 years, I'm not sure you guys want to be in that kind of mess sometimes either. But is there a way that you could, when you create these things, phase them down at the inception or the creation of them, as opposed to kind of going through this annual exercise that we do of having to do extensions and then just creating, really in a lot of ways, more uncertainty because you've got such a short window. Anybody want to take a stab at that?
I think we can take a lesson from maybe some of the things that have done, the other countries have done in a variety of those. Again, I think it comes back to what does it take for the financial community to make those decisions in a positive manner, and a lot of that has to do with, in the generation side, one of the important market mechanisms is the power purchase agreement, and the power purchase agreement typically runs for 20 years. That allows enough certainty. I can make a serious investment, and even though my margins are going to be thin for a while, I can recoup that investment over some period of time. That's enough certainty to allow me to make an investment. So I think whatever is designed needs to be fully cognizant of how the money flows and how the investors make decisions, and to the degree that instrument allows them to make a decision that they wouldn't otherwise make because of uncertainty, then I think you've got a successful mechanism.
All right.
I'd add 2 suggestions here. One, building on your first comment, when it comes to equipment, you could do a longer-term incentive, but then delegate to the Department of Energy to periodically revise the qualification levels based on criteria that Congress has established, so that it doesn't get out of date, but it could continue long-term and still have a lot of impact. The other thing you could do if you have 5-year incentives is you have 5 years and then a 3-year phase down. And yes, you can continue to modify them, extend them further, but at least you have an orderly phase out as opposed to a cliff if Congress doesn't quite act in a timely fashion.
Yeah, which is the normal experience. But my time has expired, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and thank you all very much.
Thank you. Senator Carper.
Yeah, thanks. Before Senator Thune leaves, I just want to come back, if I could, to the question you just asked of the panel, is how do we structure these tax incentives to make sure that we don't just have them expire and extend endlessly. One of the provisions that Senator Snowe and I have worked on is an investment tax credit for offshore wind. A production tax credit for offshore wind just doesn't help. We need an investment tax credit. Otherwise, if you just all we have is production tax credit, we'll never build an offshore windmill farm. And what we've crafted is legislation that says for the first 3,000 megawatts of generating capacity that's deployed off of our coasts, those would be eligible for a 30% tax credit. And after that, it's gone. And I actually think that's pretty good approach. And we'll see if it passes muster and whatever we put together next year. I also want to applaud our colleague and our chairman here, Senator Bingaman, for not just for holding this hearing, but really for being our leader in so many ways on energy and energy efficiency in particular. So thank you, and we're going to miss you, but I'll say it every day till you're gone, and we'll just talk about you when you're gone. So I want to say to our panel, thanks a whole lot for being with us today. I sometimes say that the cleanest, most affordable form of energy is the energy we never use. My first question is who actually said that first? I think I did. So
we all agree, sir.
But as our nation grapples with air quality concerns and higher energy prices, although in some ways the energy prices are coming down. I bought some gas for about $3.30 per gallon the other day, and we're with natural gas being abundant, that's helping us on some other fronts. But still know we need to save energy and try to figure out how we can incentivize energy efficiencies in this country. I often hear from a company back in Delaware that manufactures windows that the 25C energy efficiency tax credit has been for them in this recession, a significant lifeline. And I've heard that the credit has been easy for consumers to really get their heads around too, and therefore it's been pretty successful. As we all know, this 25C expired at the beginning of this year, and has been extended in this committee's package of extenders that we passed back in August, but has languished since. And I realize that a number of you here today would like to make some changes to 25C, but how important is continuing this tax credit for energy efficiency, at least in the near term, as we move into talks next year about broader reforms? Mr. Golden.
Yeah, so I can speak to that. Efficiency First supports 25C, but we do recommend some improvements. And without getting to the absolute specifics, at the current levels, as we understand it from our members, they're not driving a lot of new action. So there's a concern that at the level that we're currently at, it's a lot of additionality where people would have already maybe perhaps taken these actions. And while that seems a little bit in juxtaposition with the fact that we need to control costs as well, we think that ties into some of the comments that Mr. Nadell brought to the table around standards. So making sure that we are in fact incentivizing higher efficiency equipment that is more likely to be an upgrade from what somebody might have done otherwise. So we also believe that the 25C should be coupled, just like, for example, in the Homestar legislation where we had a more prescriptive path that addresses where industry is today and where most consumer transactions are occurring today, coupled with what ends up being a much less expensive performance track that helps enable this transformation and bringing in more private capital into the industry. But obviously, it's a balance on these standards of making sure that this package makes sense from a fiscal standpoint in the context of tax reform.
Okay. Would you say to the other panelists, do any of you agree with anything he said?
Yes, I agree. And just to add one point, the qualification levels really need to be revised. You mentioned windows. Something like 85% of the windows now being sold qualified. This no longer differentiates the best from run-of-the-mill. But if you really identify the very most efficient products, yes, we would support 25C, and in our analysis, it did perform quite well if you have that performance tier that really differentiates.
Thank you. Gentlemen, anyone else want to comment?
I just want to agree with your statement earlier about efficiency. Take another twist on it. I've often heard efficiency referred to as the fifth fuel. I always like to refer to it as the first option. So because it's easier and more cost-effective to save a unit of energy than it is to produce a new one.
All right, good, thank you.
And I just want to applaud your efforts on offshore wind. I think one of the things that's important is that that's an early stage technology, and it does need some help to get us back into a leadership position.
Good, thanks so much. Mr. Chair, my time has expired. Would you like me to stop? Or,
Go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. You may regret that, but I hope. I'm just going to stick with this for just a moment. But during some of our tax hearings earlier, we've heard about the need to make the tax code simpler. In fact, that's one of the themes that we always come back to. We don't do a real good job at it, but we certainly talk a good game. But is there a way to consolidate residential and business energy efficiency tax credits into one credit that would be as successful maybe as the separate credits? Anybody? Yeah.
So I think personally that there's enough difference between the two sectors that they deserve separate tax credits. However, from a philosophical standpoint, from a design standpoint, I think there's a lot of parallels between the performance tax credit that occurs in the commercial sector and a 25E style performance tax credit for residential as well. And I think the arbiter there, the common denominator, is performance, and rather than specifying specific materials and equipment that we continually have to update.
Okay. Anyone have a different view?
No.
Okay, good. Could I ask one more? Thanks very much. I want to make sure I pronounce your names correct. Is it Mr. Nadell? Nadell. And is it Dr. Arvizu? Arvizu, okay. Has anyone ever mispronounced your name?
Several times.
That's what kind of name is that?
It's Basque.
Really? Okay, all right. Let me focus, if I could, for a minute on industrial energy efficiency. And Dr. Arvizu, I believe you mentioned in your testimony, I think it was you, who mentioned that industry represents about 30% of energy consumption in this country. and there's a huge potential for energy savings in this sector. As we know, manufacturing has picked up considerably over the last 2 or 3 years in this country, and many companies are modernizing their plants and trying to keep up with demand, which is a good thing. However, I've been told by industry that energy efficiency projects have a huge upfront cost, despite the long-range energy savings, which usually or oftentimes prevents industry from making the investments that are needed in efficiency. And at the same time, our utilities are modernizing our energy fleets to keep up with clean air regulations and keep up with energy demand. However, utilities are much more focused on energy production rather than finding energy savings for obvious reasons. My question is, why aren't utilities partnering with industry more to implement large-scale industrial efficiency projects for energy savings? And does it make sense to incentivize these partnerships?
That's a very astute observation, and one I think that's one of the critical barriers. And it really has to do more with what incentivizes utilities and typically investor-owned utilities to focus more on the generation side than on the efficiency side. And it typically is the structural features of the business model. And to the degree that states have taken on some of that responsibility to begin to change that business model so that they're incentivized to save energy as opposed to just generate energy, then I think you'll see those wholesale changes. Clearly, that partnership between the consumer, the customer, in the case of the industry, as well as the generators, is an important aspect of helping change that business model. So, these are what I call market structure barriers. And do need, in fact, some serious attention. And we've got a whole host of regulatory dynamics that are driving that entire system. So we need to really take a step back, understand what it is that we're incenting and why, and then I think move more expeditiously to get to a transformation. I think there's real great opportunity in the fact that we've got essentially some new generation sources that offer us great economic benefit, but only if done properly, only if it's structured in a way that the government's enabling of those market forces leads us to the ultimate objectives of getting a much more sustainable energy system in the endpoint.
All right. Dr. Nadel, you want to add or take away from that?
Yes. I agree there are enormous opportunities to save energy in industry, and we can and should do a lot more to promote that. In some of the bills that Senator Bingaman has introduced, we have some targeted incentives, CHP, chiller systems. Perhaps more could be done. Industry is very diverse, so what you do in a paper plant is going to be very different from a steel plant, from an aluminum plant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's hard to have kind of a one-size-fits-all. That said, there may be some things that could be done. You mentioned utilities. Some utilities are doing a very good job of promoting industrial energy savings. It really involves getting into the process. I'd say most are not yet. If they have an industrial program, they do a commercial program, then add N-I at the end of it without making any other changes, and that doesn't work. Is there something the federal government can do to encourage, because this is primarily state regulation, the states to do a much better job on that, add a little extra bonus or something that would be possible? We are also investigating now, but we haven't completed it, the idea of how to encourage increases in capital investment by industry. When industry invests capital, most of the time it's in more efficient processes because they have to be competitive. So how do you reward not just any investment, because there's trillions of dollars of investment annually, but how do you reward increases in that investment? Because if we can get more of that investment, we can get more jobs here. We can also get more energy savings. So we're looking at that now, if that's possible, but trying to figure out what the cost would be, because we recognize that money will be tight here in Washington, and trying to come up with something that looks cost-effective.
All right. Thank you. Thank you all very much. And Senator Bingaman, just let the record show you've always been so generous with giving me all the time I want. No one else ever does that.
Well, if you'd like to stay for another round of questions, we'll be glad to oblige you with that too.
That's great. Thanks so much.
All right. Let me just ask a couple of questions that have occurred to me listening to other senators asking questions here. It seems to me we've got sort of three different issues, and maybe more than three, but this idea of putting a 5-year limit on these credits and all, I think the mindset that leads to that, at least with regard to some some of these incentives is that we're trying to support new technologies or emerging technologies or early stage technologies, and we want to support them, but we want them to be able to progress to a point where they can stand on their own after a certain period of time and compete in the marketplace. So that makes sense to have a tax credit or a tax provision to encourage the use of that technology for a period and then phase it out. So I think that's one type. It seems to me, though, that much of the other things we're talking about here really are not of that type. For example, Mr. Wagner, you talk about the idea of being sure that you have a tax incentive so that a person who owns a commercial building like the Empire State Building, anytime they can do a retrofit of that building and save 38% of their energy from what they previously have been using, we ought to be encouraging that. And that should not be something that we just do for 3 years or 5 years. We ought to, that could be a permanent part of the tax incentives, it seems to me. So I don't know that phasing that out makes a lot of sense. And then also, if we could properly design a regime for improved efficiency in appliances and equipment and that sort of thing, along the lines I think Mr. Nadel was talking about, where you have an ability to upgrade the standards or the qualification criteria periodically. There's no reason to my mind why that needs to expire either. Now, you know, one example is this Top Runner program that they've got in Japan, which I became aware of a few years ago over there, where they basically, as I understand it, and maybe some of you know better than I do exactly how it works, but my understanding is that basically in a lot of the different appliances and heating equipment and cooling equipment and all that they have in the market, every 3 years or so, they will determine who is providing the most efficient equipment, and then they will set that as the standard and say, okay, a few years down the road, that's what we're going to be requiring of everyone. So everyone's got to step up to that new achievable standard, which this company, the front runner, the Top Runner, has demonstrated is achievable. So it's another way of doing what Mr. Nadel's talking about. He was suggesting that the Department of Energy be able to upgrade the qualifications, and that might be a way. But it seems to me there are some of these incentives that it doesn't make sense to terminate after a short period of time. There are others that maybe are appropriate to terminate or phase out after a reasonably short period of time. Any of you have comments on that?
Well,
Wagner?
Senator, I think you're exactly right. When you almost have to ask yourself, what's the goal here? If the goal is to retrofit a certain number of buildings and that'll take X number of years, then that's what you want to do. But I think there's a vast amount, a tremendous amount of commercial buildings and residential buildings out there that can be renovated under these programs. And I guess I don't want to be trite, but my answer might be let's phase out the tax credit when we're done.
Once we got them all renovated.
That's right.
Right. Yes, Mr. Nadel.
Right. As the proponent of 5 years, I'd be fine if the money is there, particularly on the building and commercial, both the residential commercial buildings, to have them keep going. Is more for those, gee, how much money is there available at one point in time? But if we can make them permanent, great. We should continue to review them and revise them. In terms of the products, appliances, I would say rather than the absolute top runner, there probably should either be some flexibility in the criteria or maybe some slightly different criteria like the top 5%. I say that because for some products, manufacturers have what are called trophy products. Yes, they're out there, but they do it for bragging rights, not really to sell them. So if you were to do it for air conditioners, I think the trophy products now have a SEER of 23. Virtually none of them are being sold. You probably want to go a bit lower if you want to actually have an impact.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have a comment?
Well,
Arvizo?
I think I think you've hit on something that I think is very important, and that is to categorize the various types of incentives based on the objectives that you're trying to achieve. If I think back to the Academy reports and McKinsey studies, the things that I mentioned in my testimony, there is a tremendous amount of opportunity, and the question is how much of that do we want to capture, and who will ultimately both provide the getting over the barriers to and also reap the benefits. So I think all of these things have merit, primarily based on the fact that this is a very complicated, a system, and we need to think about it in a system from a systems perspective. I do think the opportunity for having a transformation of our energy system depends, for a large part, on how efficient we get. I've frequently said it makes no sense to shove a bunch of green electrons into a very inefficient system. I think we really need to work on the inefficient system piece first, and then the portfolio will be optimized in a much better way. And so we should have some additional priority. And I know it's not very glamorous to do some of the blocking and tackling that relates to efficiency, but it really is. It should not be underestimated how valuable it is to the ultimate goal of an energy system that has a lot of attributes that we all aspire to. So as we think through that, I think the objectives, whether they be, grabbing all of that inefficiency in the system and squeezing that out, that needs to be thought through. I think the private sector does have the wherewithal to do that with government support and government enabling, and to essentially make the necessary investments. But it's not simple, and it may be that it's better done with targeted approaches rather than some sort of uniform approach.
Senator Carper, did you have additional questions?
I do have one. It's just a sort of
ahead.
a broad general question. I want to just ask for your parting advice as we prepare to move from this Congress into the next one, especially as we move into tax reform in the next Congress. Aside from cloning Senator Bingaman, what other advice would you have for us as we look to the future, the near future? And it's going to be fairly broad. Yeah.
I think to be broad, and in the spirit of kind of the last conversation that we just had, we're asking consumers in the form of 25E and also in the commercial sector as well to make investments that obviously have benefits to themselves in terms of lower bills and healthier homes and the likes, but they also have public benefits. They have benefits in terms of clean, green capacity that we're driving to the grid, and other environmental benefits and job creation that aren't currently being monetized in that equation. And so I think that as we think about these incentives and how they change and evolve over time, there is a role for public investment in this space to make up kind of the gap between the private benefits and the public benefits. But I do think it's really important to focus on how private capital markets, capacity markets can start to fill that space. So as we create data that makes energy efficiency a much more reliable resource that utilities can begin to count on to actually displace potentially new power plants, that by creating tax credits that evolve over time and potentially on a consistent basis, and consistency is really the key from a private sector standpoint, begin to decrease as we can start seeing these private investments increase over time to fill that gap. I think that's how we'll create something that is economically sustainable and also drives the kind of transformation that we need to see in the industry.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Golden.
I think one of the things that we all know that efficiency projects can have a great return on the investment. I would hope that Congress would look at ways to stimulate, to unleash a lot of private sector capital that's sitting on the sidelines right now. How do you do that? How can you prime that pump to really get the financing flowing in the private sector? It might take just a little. What are the keys to doing that? Whether it's backstopping, guaranteeing, doing things that may not cost a lot for the federal government. You don't have to pay for the whole project, but to say we've unlocked the door, we've primed the pump, and to really flow those private sector dollars that are sitting out there on the sidelines.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Needell?
I guess I would suggest you do some analysis, use analysis to help guide these decisions, which is what approaches will give the most bang, if you will, per federal buck, and not just have it rely on politics. But I'd recommend there's all sorts of tax incentives out there, establishing a budget and then challenging people to say, within this budget, what would you do that would give us that most bang?
Good, thanks.
I agree with my colleagues, very thoughtful. I'll be a bit more philosophical, perhaps, and the thing that I would say is I would be heartened if the tone of the dialogue for energy efficiency and the things that relate to that are less political and more in terms of how do we move forward. I think this is not really a political issue from the perspective of partisanship. I think it really is an opportunity to do something that's quite compelling for the country. And so I know I speak for a lot of folks that are in the community that would think that some progress in this arena is long overdue, and we would welcome some sophisticated dialogue to move us in that direction.
As my mother would say, from your lips to God's ears. That's good. Well, sir, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if it's just a coincidence or not, but Dr. Arizu, do you live in Golden, Colorado?
I actually live in Littleton, but the laboratory is in Golden, yes.
Okay. And we have a Mr. Golden here.
It's not a coincidence.
I was just wondering. Okay. All right. It's great of you guys to come by and share your thoughts with us. You do good work, and we appreciate your trying to help us do better work. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Carper, for your involvement in this issue. Thank you all very much. I think it's been useful testimony, and we will adjourn the hearing.